joining us now. Former Republican governor and 2016 presidential candidate John Kasich, and former Chief of Staff Vice President Mike Pence, Mark Short. So, Governor, you came in second in New Hampshire, right behind Donald Trump in 2016. How strong a grasp does Trump now have on the Republican primary?
Well, I think inside the party, it's his party right now. You know, he is a phenomenon in the Republican Party. The good news, as far as I'm concerned, is once he's off the scene, I don't think anybody can duplicate what he does. I mean, the way in which he talks, the things he says, you would think it would take any normal politician down. He seems to survive it, but I don't think it's transferable. So we're just living through the age right now of Trump in the Republican Party. And then the question gets to be, what does the party look like post-Trump? And I think that's what is important for Nikki Haley. If she doesn't do so hot, or if she gets fairly close tonight, what is her vision for what the party ought to be, which gives people a reason to vote for her and not just vote against Trump?
Mark Short, you know, does she, if she doesn't do well here, does she have to get out even before South Carolina? And you had to make those decisions with Mike Pence. It was so heartbreaking, I'm sure, for him to do so poorly in the run-up to Iowa that he had to get out of the state that could have been best for him with a strong evangelical vote. So well, Andrea, is Trump such a phenomenon that she might as well just get out of it and try to save herself for a future race?
I don't think I want to advise a different candidate what they should be doing or not, or how long they want to stay in. But I think the thing that's most shocking is the fact how little has really changed, that where Trump started in this race, he's only solidified support with each additional indictment or each additional court case that comes against him. I do think one of the things, though, that's also different is obviously we've never had a former president run again in over 100 years. But when he ran in 2016, he did promise conservatives, I will meet you where you are with the courts, or I'll meet you are with taxes. I'll meet you where you are with the issue of life. And yet today there's none of that. The president just is fighting a grievance battle, and all the issues that were once conservative platforms are anathema to his campaign. He's proposing the biggest tariffs in American history. He condemns candidates who actually want to take on entitlement spending. He's criticized his own Supreme Court picks. And so what I think is most different is that on the issues, there really aren't any that Donald Trump is putting forward as what he would do for conservative Republican voters. It's just a grievance battle, and I want redemption. I want you to help fight my battles.
And it doesn't seem to matter, John Kasich. What is it about Republican voters that they are more favorable toward Trump with each indictment, that they ignore the realities around them? There was one voter, obviously not a Trump voter, who talked about the 38,000, Dow hitting and taking in that reality, which Biden doesn't seem to be able to communicate to most people.
You know, Andrea, I think it's, I think Mark hit on it. It's a grievance campaign. And there have been many people who have just been attracted to that. You know, he's strong. He's strong, and therefore he'll help fix all these things that I'm upset about. And I didn't get a fair shake on things. You know, it's called negative populism. There is such a thing called positive populism, where you look at somebody and say, you've got a problem, let's fix it together. But what he does, he says, he blames it on somebody else. And unfortunately, that authoritarian approach, that strong approach, has captured people inside the Republican Party. But you can also see there are a significant number of Republicans, just reading something in Politico a few minutes ago that says, no matter what, there are a group of Republicans who will never vote for Donald Trump in a general election. So right now he's capturing that grievance, that complaint, but over time, I don't think it lasts.
And Mark Short, Nikki Haley has just tiptoed up to the edge. She just hasn't gone after him more frequently now, just in the last 48 hours, talking about mental capacity, but saying things like chaos follows him rather than that he causes the chaos. Why is she so passive?
You know, Andrew, I think a lot of media want more of that confrontation, but I mean, Chris Christie certainly took that approach, and he eventually had to get out. I'm not so sure that her taking that approach would have made much difference. I think the reality is that the electorate is pretty locked in right now and wanting another rematch of the 2020 battle. And I say that, I mean the primary voters. I don't think the general public is excited about that, but I think that's where the primary voters in the Republican Party are. And I'm not sure it would have made a difference if she'd been more confrontational with Donald Trump.
John Kasich, was it a mistake for her to skip the debate on, you know, the one
yeah,
television
for sure.
station that dominates New Hampshire politics?
No. When you have an opportunity to get out there and you're trailing, you have to do it. I don't understand what her thinking was on that. She should have done it. It would have given her more attention, given her more upside. So I don't know what their thinking was. Like, you know, well, I'm not going to do this if Trump doesn't do it. Well, but she's behind. And so when you're behind, you got to move the ball down the field. And I think she missed an opportunity to do it. But the other thing, Andrew, we have to keep an eye on, has she had a compelling enough narrative to get the kind of wave that you saw John McCain have, you know, back in the days when he was running? I think she's not had that compelling narrative, and at the same time, those Democrats and independents begin to look at her record, see her as more conservative than they thought she was, and I think that might prevent the wave that can allow her to actually get into the single digits tonight. But let's wait and see, because there's a lot of great dislike for Donald Trump in this country, and that's what's going to drive out the independents and also the Democrats.
Of course, John McCain had the Straight Talk Express and was in that bus and talking to reporters 24/7 and to voters. And none of the candidates have done that this year. And that's the New Hampshire way.
You couldn't predict her. You couldn't predict him, Andrea. He was an iconoclastic. You know, I was sort of iconoclastic. I didn't beat Trump, but I beat everybody else. But you got to just capture people's imagination up there. And we'll see if the negative approach towards Trump is enough to create that wave, because people also want to know, what are you going to do? It's not just why you're against the other guy, but what are you going to do specifically?